You said something important. You said, you know, you can get into these programs potentially, and if you've created demand, then it works.
Yeah.
And this is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah.
In fact, I've run enough labels and worked with enough artists where they feel that once they have distribution, that's the holy grail. They can then kind of sit back and get the record in the stores. Is that true?
Well, we have a guy in common, this guy Joe Regis, and Joe Regis, we have a rule in our company. It's the Joe Regis rule, and the rule came from, hey Andy, I can't find my record in any stores, so nobody can buy it. And the answer was, Joe, you haven't created any demand for their artist, so the stores don't want it there, so nobody's coming in and ask for it, so I can't get it in there. He's right, of course. You can't buy it if it's not there. The problem or the dichotomy in that whole situation is you can't get it there unless there's demand for it. So it's a bit chicken and the egg, but what it really comes down to is, and I talked about the stores before, there's 35,000 titles in a store, there's 36,000 titles coming out every year, there's going to be choices made. And generally what happens is the promotion, and particularly the pre-promotion of an artist, is going to determine whether the store brings the record in, how they display it, and how prominently it's displayed. So you earn your ability to be featured, basically. And there are some labels that do it wonderfully, and there are some labels that don't do it quite so well, and those that do it wonderfully do great. And those that don't are going to have to learn very quickly, or they're not going to have retail space.
Who does it wonderfully, and what do they do that makes it wonderful?
Well, I mean, in our world, and I'll speak in the ADA thing, Sub Pop, for example, is a company that has been around for a long time. They've had their ups and downs, obviously famous for having discovered the Seattle scene and captured that so well. But, you know, Sub Pop had a very typical indie history. Did well, found some, you know, truly life-changing artists. Sold the company, lost touch with their audience, spent money excessively, made a lot of mistakes, nearly went out of business, scaled way back, re-entrenched themselves to the original ideas that they had for the label, and now are probably doing better than they've ever done before. They work way ahead. We get music probably 4 months before that record's in the street. Retailers get the music, writers get the music, they listen very carefully to what people say. They may elect after putting it out not to put it out. I mean, once they get a consensus opinion from somebody. They're very artist driven, they listen very carefully to their artists, and they're really committed and passionate about their music. They do a great job. You know, you mentioned Better Than Ezra. Interesting story, and slightly off the topic, but it's worth talking about the differences in just how music can be discovered. That in that case, that was actually Elektra found this band that had done about 25,000 units on their own in this area, right. Just kind of traveling, selling out of their trunk, doing things on consignment. And they actually signed the band with the idea, okay, they're not really ready for prime time yet, but let's sign them, put it out through ADA, give them some chance to grow, and we'll see what happens. And the very first thing that happened is that song, and I can't remember it now, somebody's going to know, Good.
Good.
Gets on a station, gets on another station, goes on another station, finally gets on K-Rock in LA, which is to this day still probably the most influential station in the country. And before we could even ship the record, it was a hit, and it was our first platinum record. But it can happen that quickly. It more typically happens in the way the Bright Eyes happens, you know.
Years and years.
This is the 5th record from a guy that's 24 years old, literally was starting, you know, playing, you know, doing stuff when he was not 13, even in college,
yeah, right.
With a band of friends that just kind of hung out and did what they did, found an audience, and it just expanded on that audience over the years.
2 questions. A, do you ever consider individual artists, or do they have to be with a label? And I know that gets blurred. And what does it take for either of those, a label or an artist, to get a deal with ADA?
ADA is primarily a distributor of labels, meaning that we won't partner with a label unless there's a label there. We are not a label, we just do distribution. We don't have the inherent functions of promotion or publicity or any of the rest of it. We do all the things that are the distribution functions that I described earlier, but we are not the label. And as a result, we've done very few label direct type deals. We did do a deal with a band called
Artist Direct or
artist direct type deals. Most artists know exactly what they want to put on the record, but have a very difficult time trying to figure out who the audience for that record might be. And frankly, that's what the label's job is. We need the label in place to tell us what to do, because we don't conceive of marketing plans. We act out the marketing plans that come from the label. There are some labels that are really artist-driven, and we talked about Annie DeFranco.
And OAR.
OAR is one that we work with, that frankly were so impressive that I broke the rule. And they basically, you know, were, again, guys that came out of college. They were originally from the Baltimore area, went to school in Ohio, literally toured Ohio, or as far as they could get away from school on the weekends and get back for class. They were superstars in Ohio. I mean, you know, you put out a record there, they'd put out a record, and it would literally debut in the top 5 in Ohio and nowhere else.
Yeah, and I tried to sign them too.
Young guys, smart guys, driven to perform, driven to do something different, broke the rule. We sold just a little under 800,000 records with them.
800,000 records?
Most of which was below the top 200, most of which is just them out touring all the time. Now, of course, they're out of school, they tour constantly, they've become a huge band in that world of performance-driven music, and it's all been done basically without a hit. And if you can survive in this business by finding an audience without being driven by a hit record, you've got a career. You know, if you've got a hit record, you have to survive that hit record and find an audience. You know, you've done a hit song. A good example in my life was Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates was somebody loves Hall & Oates here? No. I don't think so. So
I do.
I kind of liked them, actually. But Hall & Oates didn't sell any records unless they had hits on their records. If they had hits, they sold platinum-level records, million sellers. If they didn't have a hit record, they didn't sell anything. You know, then you got the other side of the coin with Annie, who you know, can regularly do 300,000 or 400,000 records. Bright Eyes, good example. OAR now, good example. Bands that can actually reach an audience without mainstream media, without a hit. That's a business. That's a career.
And their catalog continues. So, and I don't want to ask you to give proprietary information, but if you've got an artist that sold aggregate 800,000, do you pay monthly or quarterly?
We pay monthly.
Pay monthly. So, what's a monthly check going to OAR from you guys look like? Or
well, it's whatever they sold that month minus my distribution fee. My distribution fee for those guys is probably about 20%.
Right.
So they're getting 80% of what the retail price is, which is a hell of a lot more than if they were signed to a major label and getting 12 points minus deductions and advances. So they're making a lot of money.
Would it be fair to say they've made over $1 million?
Oh, each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to get some range of what can be done on your own.